There is a fifth dimension,
about the unknown,
beyond that which is known to man.
The Garden of Thought.
The Babylon Project was our last best hope for peace.
Unexplained
mythologies.
This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call
The Garden of Thought with Jeff Lippman.
Eventually, our sun will grow cold and go out.
Whether a thought is spoken or not, it is a real thing, and it has power.
It won't just take us. It'll take Marilyn Monroe, and Lao Tzu, and Einstein, and Morobuto.
The mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience.
All of this was for nothing. Unless we go to the stars.
Let's make sure that history never forgets the name.
the Garden of Thought.
Welcome everyone into the Garden of Thought, and we're welcoming back in returning guest Bernie Taylor. And he did a prior show, which was entitled The Story of the Sky. Great story, a great show. Went back like 34,500 years to cave paintings and sort of traveled around the zodiac, and then sort of rediscovered or discovered perhaps the original zodiac and the original story in the sky, which turns out to be a lot like the hero's journey. So it was really very interesting, and I definitely commend you all to that. They were doing we're going into similar, but centaurs, and the story of centaurs, and probably back in the same part of the world, I suppose, but that part of the world is, draw a giant oval sort of around the entire Mediterranean and keep moving it east, probably to the Iranian plateau. But we have a guest here, and he's going to tell us all about it. So, Bernie, thank you very much for being back on the show.
Jeff, it's an absolute pleasure. I had intended to get all dolled up today. I was going to shower. I was going to shave, but daylight savings time, the whole thing just I slept in a little late. And so you have to pardon my appearance this morning.
Well, luckily,
but next time audio. I promise to shower and shave and look good for the audience.
Well, luckily it's audio, so I can actually say that you look beautiful. And also, I feel like I need to explain my silly shirt, because today is the premiere of season 2 of the Lip Men on the UFL, where we start covering the United Football League 3 weeks before gameplay. And so tonight is our first show covering preseason. Of course, anyone who's hearing this, you're probably going to be hearing it in 4 weeks' time or whatever. So you'll be like, what's he talking about? Anyway, so here we are. We nobody cares what we look like. No one cares what I'm wearing. But we do want to hear about centaurs, those magnificent creatures. The top, from the torso is a man. From the sort of the waistline down is a horse. You can't really say half, because a horse is like 3 times the mass of a man. And they picture prominently in many of the most famous stories that we all know. Probably maybe most famously Hercules. I don't know, but I guess that's what you'll tell us about.
Well, actually, we're going to explore the questions, because there are a few questions out there. And this topic came about through our last session, when you brought up Sagittarius as a centaur. And because that is a compilation of images in Upper Paleolithic cave art. So I looked deeper into this to see exactly what is a centaur. And there's questions. There's a lot of questions out there. And so kind of the start with the narrative is, what does the dictionary say a centaur is? Well, the dictionary will say, what's this? The Merriam-Webster dictionary. Any race of centaur fabled to be half human, half horse. That's basically the narrative, which you had there. And then, so what is not a centaur? Well, a satyr is not a centaur.
Nope.
It's totally not a centaur. But what is a satyr? And a satyr is the characteristics of a goat or horse. Okay. So a centaur could be part horse. Is we're going to say is horse, and a satyr could be a horse. The question is, does the satyr have 2 legs or 4 legs? Okay, so we're in some very murky area here on what becomes a centaur and what is a satyr, and then what is the minotaur? The minotaur is a kind of a standing bull, so it has 2 legs. Okay, and we have images in antiquity of centaurs next to minotaurs and centaurs next to satyrs. And so somehow there had to be a differentiate between them. And perhaps it's in the storylines, or perhaps people just making things up.
Sure.
But that is the question. That's the question. So the earliest known centaur is a clay statue from about 1050 BCE, found in Greece. And then we start finding centaurs in the story of Achilles. So Achilles is raised by the centaur Chiron or Chiron. People pronounce it different ways. And the entire life of Achilles is told through, prior to going to the Trojan War, his entire life is told through Chiron, because we see all these images all over the place.
Now, Chiron is the centaur that's played by Pierce Brosnan in the Percy Jackson movies. Basically, teaches all the young godlings how to be gods and fight and things like that. So I think yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, that you're right on. You're absolutely right. So that becomes the new version of Chiron, and so he becomes the mentor of just about everybody.
Right, all the demigods.
And we find a lot of centaurs just like we find in Percy Jackson. Picasso did a centaur. Dali did a centaur. Picasso did a centaur that he did it in light. And so he had a light pen against, it was probably a piece of glass, and it was filmed. And the final filming of it has the centaur in light itself, which is kind of pretty cool. And Dali's, Salvatore Dali did a centaur that is more monstrous than anything that we could find in the Greco world.
Well,
now there is a centaur. There's a skeleton of a centaur. Yeah, there's a skeleton of a centaur.
Yeah.
And so if anybody doesn't believe there were centaurs, one can go to the University of Tennessee at Knoxville Library, and there is it's a human upper torso, head, and a horse. Okay. And it was made by a artist who put together the pieces to show that it is a real thing. But in fact, it is not a real thing. Okay. I mean, not a real thing today, we could say, right? Okay.
Right.
And then there are not centaurs. To have a centaur, there must be centauruses, because how do you get offspring, right? Because there were many centaurs. Okay. I mean, presumably, right? We don't need to get into all birds and bees on this program. This is not rated at that level. But yeah, there were centauruses, many of them. But the most famous centaur, of course, is Chiron. But to most people, the centaur is the constellation in the night sky.
Right.
Okay. And so even if people don't know, if people have sort of basic of astronomy, they might not be able to find the centaur in the night sky, but they know there's a centaur up there. It's a thing.
Okay. That's Centaurus, right?
At Centaurus, the centaur Centaurus. And opposite in the night sky is Sagittarius. And that's where we were in the last program. And so Sagittarius, as depicted in astronomy, in modern astronomy at least, is a centaur. And on the horizon, they face each other, left and right, which is kind of cool. So there must be like some common element why someone would put these two centaurs. They're right, almost, they're almost right next to each other, okay? And they're facing each other, which is kind of cool, which is not a perspective that most people think of when they think of Sagittarius. They think as the lone centaur. And Sagittarius is typically depicted in astronomy as having a bow, and not just in astronomy, but also in astrology. And Sagittarius is sometimes depicted as having wings, and that becomes part of the narrative. And there's some question about whether Sagittarius had wings, and where does that come from? Well, it comes from that Babylonians, ancient Mesopotamia, where there's an image of we'll call it a centaur with wings. I mean, that's and it's well known. It's on a cylinder seal, and the cylinder seals they're about the size of a man's thumb. Okay. And people, they see these images like across the computer screen, but the cylinder seal is about the size of the thumb. It's round, right? Just like a man's thumb. And they would roll out the cylinder seal onto the clay or substrate, and that would give the impression. So what we see when we see these cylinder seals is, actually, we're not seeing the seal. We see the image, the imprint of the seal. And these seals were used for commerce. And so somebody had their their own. It was like their stamp of sorts, but they would cylinder seal out to say, "This is me, and this is my story, and this is a great story, and this is a really good way to do it." So there's the Greeks weren't convinced. Some of the Greeks weren't convinced that centaurs had wings. Aristophanes said that they did not have wings, and he said they did not use bows either. And it's very clear that centaurs throw rocks. I mean, except for Chiron, all the other centaurs threw rocks.
Right. Chiron was the civilized centaur, like Enoch was the civilized Sleestak in Land of the Lost.
Exactly. So centaurs throw rocks. That's a. Now we can kind of like settle this dispute over what Sagittarius as perhaps a centaur and Centaurus, of course, as a centaur, on an artifact called the Farnese Atlas. Now, the Farnese Atlas dates to about 150 CE, and it was originally situated at the Farnese, at the Villa Farnese, which is just north of Rome. And Farnese was a cardinal. Okay, and above the so-called Farnese Atlas is a mural or fresco in the ceiling that has a depiction of mostly of the same. And people pretty much know the Farnese Atlas by this Atlas, the Titan, holding up the globe. It's got to be one of the top 100 known images in the world. People not know the name Farnese Atlas, but it's the Titan Atlas holding up the globe. And it's in marble, and it stands about 7. The sculpture is about 7 foot tall. So we could say that it's a man of today's stature with a gold globe on his head.
Right, so sort of like outside of 30 Rock, they have a version of it.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the most known images in the world.
I probably should to people who don't know what 30 Rock is. It's Rockefeller Center, where where they have the ice skating rink in New York City, and NBC Studios are there. Saturday Night Live is filmed there. Late nights have been filmed there. So and of course the show, the comedy 30 Rock was filmed there. So pretty famous image, but I believe the globe in that is not is sort of more latticed but as opposed to solid. But that's not particularly important at the moment.
Yeah. So that's the Farnese Atlas. Now, the Farnese Atlas was presumably astronomy from Claudius Ptolemy, who is one of the greats. I mean, the absolute greats in astronomy and geography, and he's the man. We can do a program on him someday. But there's some problems with the Farnese Atlas. One problem with the Farnese Atlas is that the constellations don't line up on the ecliptic as they did 150 CE. And so there's a astronomer from the University of Louisiana, and he took all kinds of pictures, and he didn't have astronomical software as we have today. And he figured out that it was actually from about 150 BCE, so 200 years before, based in astronomy. And Ptolemy, his source allegedly for astronomy and all this stuff came from Hipparchus, which is 200 years before. And there were good records. Ptolemy had good records of the astronomy of Hipparchus. And so Ptolemy didn't invent or discover a lot of what we give him credit for astronomy. He had inherited from earlier people. And there's a constellation perspectives that Ptolemy give to us that he never could have seen, or people in his time couldn't have seen, because they've been too far south along the horizon, below his horizon. But what we can see on the Farnese Atlas is we can see both Centaurus and we can see Sagittarius. Okay. And the Centaurus is pretty clear. It's a man and a horse, and we're okay with that. And the Sagittarius is sort of on the shoulder, the left shoulder of Atlas. Okay. It's kind of a pretty cool image. And there's been illustrations of this Farnese Atlas so people can study people such as me. And when we look at the illustrations, we can see that Centaurus isn't, pretty, good look for a centaur. But when we look at Sagittarius, half of the body, or just really behind the man's butt, not the horse's butt, what man's butt would be, we can't see because it's under the shoulder, the left shoulder of Atlas.
Mm-hmm.
it's almost as if the Greeks, they hadn't decided whether Sagittarius had a full body or stood like a satyr.
They left it open to interpretation.
They left it open for interpretation, absolutely, and so that creates it creates that question of
the original Schrodinger's box was actually Atlas's shoulder.
Yes. So it creates quite the mystery. And if you're a Sagittarian, in astrology, who are you? I mean, truly, it asks these deep, dark questions. Are you, and so it's really cool to see. But the illustration is clearly.
I'm sorry why I'm laughing. I thought to myself, yes. Remember, inside of here, I'm like 80% 15-year-old boy. So even though I'm a 56-year-old man when we're recording this, and all I can think there is you can't decide whether you're a horse's ass or a human's ass.
That's right. That's really what it is. But you're an ass either way. That's
right. Either way, you're an ass. And listen, I think at some point, around your mid-30s, you just come to accept that.
But on the Farnese Atlas, the Sagittarius is depicted with a bow, and that's kind of important. But above the Farnese Atlas, where it originally was at the Villa Farnese and Lazio, just north of Rome, there's a fresco, is a ceiling mural, and we can look at the interpretation of what the artist saw in the Farnese Atlas, or what people want to see in the time of Ptolemy. And Centaurus is exactly as we depicted with the full body of a horse, but Sagittarius also has the body of a horse.
I like it.
So Sagittarius on the fresco over the ceiling of the Farnese Atlas is clearly different from the Farnese Atlas itself. There's a few other differences too, but otherwise it keeps with the foundational storyline, because this is what people wanted to believe at the time of Claudius Ptolemy, 150 CE.
Now, I think that the Babylonians, the Sumerians, called the creature actually the Lamassu. I might be conflating it with a different creature.
Yeah, so they had, of course, they had their own mythological narrative, and so if we say, we can't exactly say that Sagittarius comes from the Babylonians because it's a different animal.
Right, and they put wings on lots of things. They put wings on everything. It was sort of their symbol of saying it came from the heavens. It was divine, so they stuck wings on it.
It was divine, but it is clear it's a different divination. Okay, so the question is, I assume that 15% of the audience or so are Sagittarians, and so does any of this stuff line up? And Sagittarians are November 22nd to December 21st. And Sagittarius, all the constellations have, actually all the astrological signs have symbols, and Sagittarius is the bow and the arrow. And the traits
15%?
Okay, well, actually divide. Actually, I can't be 15. So divide. 12,
right?
Yeah.
What was that, like 8%? 8%.
Okay, 8%. Yeah.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if you had some stat that more people were born, later in the year than the rest of the year.
No, you're right on. You're right, Jeff. You got me. You keep me honest, at least.
That's okay. Listen, that's what we want that on the show, except when we're purposely being dishonest. we can be wrong. We can have different opinions, so we could have different interpretations of things. That's all welcome. But I just wanted to make sure that we had the right there. Okay, all right. Moving on. That's
so the traits of Sagittarius: compassion, curiosity, honesty, and you would be a good Sagittarian. Independence, and disgruntled that their birthday is muddled up with Christmas. So if you ever talk to a Sagittarian, they're always like, "Oh, my birthday! When I was a kid, I had to share it with Christmas, and we had one party, not two, and all that sort of stuff." And you've heard it. We've all heard it.
Sure. Also, it's like Ramadan and Hanukkah. Also, I mean, all three of the religions have sort of taken the fun out of your birthday being during Sagittarius.
Exactly. It's just one of those things. And so we're saying compassion, curiosity, honesty, and independence. Okay. So does this actually fit Sagittarians that we know? I mean, famous Sagittarians. So there's a few of them out there. Winston Churchill, Joseph Stalin, Franco, and Charles de Gaulle. You think about this. The big four, you're missing two, but the four of the big six are Sagittarians of the time. And I mean, that must be divine, or just people were disgruntled with their birthday getting muddled up at Christmas, and they became, let's say, powerful figures. Okay.
Well, also on the opposite side of the table, almost like Sagittarius and Centaurus.
Yeah. And so, and there's a few other Brezhnev, and Pinochet, Nero. So we've got a good, solid group of people that I'm going to tell you, none of these people are compassionate. Okay, none of them are. I mean, Nero is the top. The least compassionate person in the history of the world is actually one of the three top in the world is Nero, and he's the one who's killed all the Christians. As soon as it became Christianity, he started killing
there
them.
as well. And we probably shouldn't leave out Genghis Khan, but I don't know that anyone actually knows his birthday.
Exactly, but there actually are some compassionate. There's Taylor Swift. Oh. She's a very compassionate person. She extended the tour and gave her drivers of the trucks a whole bunch of money to stay on the ride. Frank Sinatra, also a very compassionate person. He was known to give away money to people at random. And most important, the most compassionate person in the world at this time, Pope Francis, a very compassionate person. All right. So, there's really a mix of. Yeah, Oprah is a Sagittarian?
I don't know, but she gives away everything.
Oh, yeah. So, but there's truly a mix. So one may believe as a Sagittarian that they're compassionate, but you can't really look at the data doesn't land on that exclusively.
That's more astrology.
And of course, all these people were disgruntled that their birthdays were muddled up with Christmas. Okay. Now, the Sagittarius is also very well known for the so-called wow signal. And the wow signal was there must have been like 30 years ago that they were doing, picking the SETI people, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence people, were listening to radio waves. And on the radio waves, they picked up this unusual sequence and they said, wow. Like someone actually wrote it down, wow. And that became the first evidence that there's ET life out there that's sending radio signals. And, I'm going to tell you, it's probably totally bogus. Someone just made those signals. It's never been heard of anywhere else or again. And so someone just did. And this is the days when people were working zeros and ones. I mean, truly, actually, in numbers, 0, 1s, letters for the algorithms that they could see it. This is not high-end computer. This is not what the technology for this is like 1/1,000,000th of what you have on your iPhone. Okay. So.
Right. But it's entirely consistent with the dark forest theory. If they realized their signal was picked up, they went silent.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yes. So there are all kinds of things. So, but in history, or the history of art, or the history of mythology, Achilles and Chiron. Achilles, as an infant, is given over to Chiron, and he's raised by Chiron. And Chiron teaches him how to play the lyre, the instrument. It's kind of like it's a little harp that you carry. And he teaches him how to sling and shoot a bow. He taught him about medicine. And at the death of Achilles, at the actual death of Achilles, when he gets it in the ankle, the foot, or the heel, he calls out for help. And he asks for a recipe, a medicinal recipe that came originally from Chiron, but obviously it doesn't work. But Chiron ultimately has to give back Achilles because he's not becoming a man per se, but he's becoming this endless child. It's like being at camp your whole life, right? You can't live at camp unless you're actually working there, and when you're after 18, otherwise you're still a kid, right?
Right. It's like the porpoises who are always in the theme parks their entire lives, and they can't be repatriated with other dolphins because they have no idea how to bathe.
That's a very good analogy. And there's lots of literature and there's lots of images and that we can find of this whole thing. And Chiron also influenced Ajax, Jason the Argonauts, Heracles or Hercules, Perseus, Theseus the Minotaur, Odysseus. I mean, there's a whole long list. So you're not really a hero or an established hero unless you were trained by Chiron.
Right. He was like the headmaster, the personal trainer of the demigods, basically. And I guess he sort of took us, he's like the guide, the Virgil character sort of that took us from the age of heroes into the Greek age of man, which is sort of what the Iliad and the Odyssey was sort of doing that transition to, or well, probably right after the Odyssey, because of course Odysseus also a hero and demigod.
Absolutely. And so there's a whole narrative that people can really follow the history. And so Chiron was in a cave, which is interesting because we talked about in the last session, we talked about the centaur in a cave and the Gallery of Dis in El Castillo cave in northern Spain. And so the Chiron came out of a cave, although he was civilized. So did he really come out of a cave or live in a cave, or was he on the wall of a cave? I would say he was really found on the wall of a cave.
It doesn't seem like something with the body of a horse is going to confine itself to a cave.
Exactly. So that we find the death of Chiron in the fourth lab of Heracles or Hercules when he captures Erymathean boar, and Chiron and Hercules are at the table drinking wine. It's wine, right? And centaurs are not supposed to drink wine because they get really drunk and they get really violent, and they're not supposed to. It's all totally off limits. Effectively, they're alcoholics. Alcoholics. Okay,
same
and that's
Hercules,
the metaphor,
right? He did the same.
Exactly same. And so when the other centaurs catch the whiff of the wine, they come to retrieve it or attack Hercules, and it becomes a fight. And Heracles has he slings a bow and he tries to shoot at them, but his arrows are tipped with the poison from the Hydra,
right,
from the second labor of Hercules, and that poison drips or cuts into Chiron, and that becomes the death of Chiron. And so he kills his own master.
Right. He accidentally killed the teacher.
Yeah, Luke and Darth, right?
Oh, yeah.
And his father killed my father. You are my son, or something.
Right.
Big moment.
It is a big moment. It was a big moment. Yeah. I mean, it's been sort of muddied over since by atrocities known as the prequels and the sequels. But yeah.
Exactly. But there were other centaurs, and there's a famous image of a centaur in Naples from the so-called the Perithethos' wedding, and at this wedding, I believe that Perithethos is the male at the groom. And so the centaurs go to the wedding. There's a squabble. They start fighting, and these centaurs are Lapith. The people, the Lapiths. They fight till they fight the centaurs. So these people at the wedding of the Lapiths, and they fight the centaurs, and all the centaurs get into a big fight, and becomes very famous in art at the British Museum and other places. And so centaurs were considered to be beastly. How to say, violent. They threw rocks, and they always seem to be fighting all the time. Sort of like people like a bar. These people fighting the bar.
They were the biker gang. They were your unruly guests. You had to invite them.
Your unruly guests.
They were a local tribe or a clan, but you really didn't know what you were getting.
Exactly, and the most important thing. So what we find though is that there were centaurs besides Chiron. Okay, so of course, at the death of Chiron, the Hercules, but we also continue to find centaurs. Now, so where does this come from? So I don't believe that the Greeks and the Romans invented anything. I think that they had earlier sources, and I think that this centaur character can be found in other places, and so we can go up into northern Siberia, Yakutia, among the Yakut people. And so these are people that are generally termed to have shamanic traditions. Okay, so this is where shamanism comes from. Okay, and among the Yakut people, they have the sacred horse dance that you can now go to, like a traveling show, and sort of like the Xin Yun, the Chinese, before communism, the Chinese traditions and dance and
sure.
music.
I went to
they're the same thing for the
I went to
Have you seen it?
I went to one of their shows. I didn't realize that it was like a religion, and it was like sort of like a conversion ceremony immersed in sort of bad comedy. It's very pretty, but I won't be going again. I mean, that's for sure.
Yeah, I saw that. I lived in Beijing when in my mid-20s. I lived in Beijing for 4 years, and during the time period, I saw a lot of Beijing opera, but I didn't see it on the stage. It was in tea houses. So it was meant to perform to a smaller audience, and
it's illegal in China now. That religion, and I guess it has been for a while. That's the whole thing.
Yeah, so that's okay. That's the narrative of the Shenyun people.
Oh, that's not true.
They're trying to sell that story. They're trying to sell this. We're before communism. We have nothing to do with the new state, and we have nothing to do with tariffs and whatever. But the fact is, they make a lot of money in China on this program, because the traveling show that you see in the United States is played in China on big stages.
Okay, well then they are a little bit full of it. Well, I bought into that, but I didn't buy into continuing support. So I guess I paid my money once, and that'll be.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. You see people dance and jump and spin around and all this kind of stuff. So the Yakut have the sacred horse dance that's now on the stage, like the Shenyun. But originally, the sacred horse dance was among the shamanic character. And he would do this. Individual would do the dance to go to the land of the dead to speak to other shamans who would give him advice and power to cure people in the living.
I was thinking about something today, which might tie into this, and it might not. And since I know you a little bit, I know you'll probably think about it, and it and I don't expect you to have an answer. And so, I sort of let's retroactively do some things or retrofit some things. So sort of most of the modern religions, sort of seem to coincide with the agricultural revolution, sort of where man has dominion over Earth because they've already had dominion over the beast, and now they can have cities and settlements because they can grow their own food where they are, and like your greatest enemies are famine, plague, pestilence, floods, fires, but it's no longer the beasts. A few thousand years before that, that's sort of when humans first domesticated horses. So the horse and the human, you can sort of see the merger of the horse and the human as being sort of symbolic for, that big thing, because you could, I'm not sure that we were quite on par. I don't know that we had mastery of the beasts until we had the horses. We probably did because we were a clan or whatever. But the first evening out, as I understand it, was actually tens of thousands of years before that, when sort of wolves and men sort of struck sort of an alliance where they were sort of, instead of being competitors, they sort of started working together. And then, of course, you got sort of wolf dogs and sort of, so that's why I think like things like werewolves and things like that are sort of some of the old legends, berserkers and stuff like that, because the merger of man and dog was the first where man sort of took the lead as preeminent apex predator, and then with the horse, certainly, and then with the land, it's almost like you didn't need the beast necessarily anymore for food. You wanted it, but you didn't really need it. So, where this fits into this, maybe that explains sort of like the horseman thing being. It's consistent with what you're saying, that the horseman thing is much earlier than at least when we get the writings of the Greeks and Romans.
Absolutely, no question about that. And so the horse in the Yakut tradition, he would transform into the horse in the horse dance, but the horse itself couldn't take him to the land of the dead because he needed to go many places. He needed to dive into the water, so he would become a tern or a loon or something. And need to fly into the air. He would transform into an eagle. So he's truly a shapeshifter to get there in the so-called horse dance. And so I hope that's what in the Yakut tradition, when they travel on the stages around the world, and I hope that to keep that tradition. But we find these images. So this is a spiritual type of thing that we find around the world, and you find headdresses of feathers. So the feather gives you the power of flight. It's a common theme. So we find these images deeper in time. We can find them in Upper Paleolithic cave art. When the last session we talked about the gallery of discs, when the man overlaps with the horse to become the centaur, which overlaps with the bird to become the Pegasus, becomes Pegasus, right? And then perhaps even a man that becomes a centaur and then becomes a winged centaur at the same time. And which Aristophanes said among the Greeks was not a possibility, but we do find these things in Upper Paleolithic cave art. Well, there's another cave near Bordeaux, and it's called the Grotte de Père d'Ampère. And this is one of those caves you can go to the next time you drop in Bordeaux on your trips or wherever. And so in the Grotte de Père d'Ampère, there's a horse, and this horse is very, very well known. But what people hadn't realized about this horse, or the panel itself, is that the panel sort of sticks out from the wall, and characters on the horse emerge when you look at the wider panel. And so you find from the horse becomes this birdman. It's actually a bearded vulture that is above the horse, and the body of the bearded vulture connects to where the neck of the horse is. And people always say, well, the rear of this horse is really weird, but it's actually a diving tern. It's a bird. And so what we have in this Grotte de Père d'Ampère image is the transformation of the horse, the man who becomes a vulture, and the tern in the same tradition as we have in the Yakut.
What's a tern?
A tern is a bird that it's a bird. It's a little bird that it's a diving bird.
Okay.
Tern, it looks like something like a seagull.
Okay.
It looks like something like a seagull. And so we have this tradition among the Greeks that definitely didn't derive from the Greeks, but we found it among shamanic people in Siberia. But we find it in Upper Paleolithic cave art in multiple locations in Spain and France. I haven't seen it anywhere closer to Greece than that, but ancient Greeks had traveled around the Mediterranean. Their predecessors, the Phoenicians, had traveled even further. And they had these stories, they had these images. So where does it all come from? Well, it comes from deeper in time, but it's about the transformation. But what the Greeks did was they made their own stories. They effectively owned it. Now, Picasso had seen this Grotte de Père d'Ampère image of the man and the horse on the tern, but he took a slightly different impression of it, that he kept the big barreled chest of the Birdman, and he had an unusual beak. His beak is not related to any bird out there, and this was his curtain design for Roman's play, Juliet, in 1936. And so Picasso had seen this image, and he walked away with his own interpretation. He kept the feet, he kept the arms, the chest. So Picasso brings it to an entirely new audience that Picasso never said where he got it from, which is quite interesting. Just as the ancient Greeks don't tell us where they received it from,
right? Because
it's their story. And so Picasso was really fond of centaurs, and I said earlier that he had this light pen that he did centaur, and it was filmed and becomes as one image. Now there's another cave at Gibraltar, which is on the kind of the southern end of the Iberian Peninsula, or the south eastern side of the Iberian Peninsula. It's currently a British territory, and long ago, it was probably about in 2016, maybe 2015, 14. A group of anthropologists said, "Well, they found this engraving on the wall of this cave, and they said, well, this is a Neanderthal cave. There's never any chance of humans in here, and it was 39. They said it was 39,000 years ago. Humans had not arrived there." And they said, well, this must be Neanderthal. They never looked any further than that. Completely bogus. What's happened is that humans are now in Europe at 54,000 years ago. So this 39,000 years ago must be Neanderthal, was complete utter nonsense. And this engraving was a hashtag. It became known as the Neanderthal hashtag. But I'm going to tell you, it was fraud. The whole concept was fraud. They never looked at it. And they said it was Neanderthal, but they never looked at it from the perspective of art. And they admit to saying they never looked at it from the perspective of art. So it's not like you make this up. They did interviews. Other people can figure this out.
Finger painting or something?
So actually it was an engraving on the wall. So it looks like a hashtag. And so somebody had an object that they scratched onto the wall.
Right.
And this was interesting story behind this was I wasn't the first one to call this as bogus, but I was the first one that gave an alternative explanation. And last year there was a Netflix series called Secrets of the Neanderthals. And this image as Neanderthal origin was in the documentary, and they were celebrating, yelling, cheering that they've been validated. And I put out a blog on my webpage beforeorion.com just about a month before the Netflix series came out. I knew the story, right? Mm-hmm. And then I got a there's an email, or if it was X or Facebook, I got a message from someone from the BBC. Interesting. Well, this person was the person was working for the BBC as a watchdog agency of the BBC. I never heard of this person before. And the person said to me, or messaged me, that they agree with a lot of what I said, but some things they don't really like.
Okay. So
what happened was they cut it from the Netflix series. They cut the so-called Neanderthal hashtag from the Neanderthal series of this program. And they have this guy, Clive Finlayson, who is the head of the project, and he says something, and then the narrator disputes what he says. Okay, and so people working, on their couches in the middle of nowhere, don't wake up in the morning and shave, do have a voice. They have a voice, and the BBC said, "We like this story, and we like what you said." Because we don't want to look stupid on Netflix, the entire world. Okay. Right. And that's really what it was about. And so then the people from in this government of Gibraltar, this is very high levels. And then the governor of Gibraltar put out a press release that yes, the documentary is great, but we also have this. But the BBC did not buy into it based on what I said. So in all the images that they've been put out over time from this Gibraltar image, they're covered with dirt. They're covered with dirt. So you see all the interviews in the background, they have the images covered with dirt, but there was actually a cleaned off image that was taken. And years ago, back in 2017 or so, I bought the image from the photographer because nobody had the image. Okay? At least nobody had a sharp image. And I took a really good look at it. And one of the things I realized pretty quick was this. I tried to figure out the scale of this image. And the scale is the size of 2 adult hands. And not only is it the size of 2 adult hands, but the hashtag, 2 hands fit exactly into it. You see the metacarpals on the top, so the top, backside, the top of your hand. It fits right into this hashtag. So the person who created this, they scaled it with their own hands. Mm-hmm. And so it's 2. But I also looked into this more closely because I had the cleaned off images where everybody else was looking at the dirty images. There's a horse. There's a pregnant horse, actually. And the pregnant horse fits into this hashtag. Pretty cool stuff. It's actually a fascinating horse because this horse turns its head to the right, which is exactly the same one that we saw way in the Agnus Dei panel at Grotte and Pair. It's that same perspective, okay, which is unusual in Paleolithic cave art, which you have a horse, just like a flat horse on the wall. It might be moving, it might be getting humped or something, but it's not turning its head to the right side. So we have this mare.
It's not a nature depiction; it's a depiction of something else.
It's a picture of something else, exactly. And the Grotte Parent and Pair was called the Agnus Dei panel after a biblical. I'm not biblical, but a prayer that features a lamb, or the Lamb of God, turning its head to the side. Okay. And that's where this concept comes from. Well, on this panel, we also have there's many characters. We have this man; he's actually running. And most of his body, or most of his features, fit into the lines in the same way that the mare does, in the same way that the cross hands. It's pretty cool stuff. And so what's interesting about this man is he has a really huge head, like really huge head. Whereas the rest of his body, it could be human. Well, there's an artifact that they found, Clive Finlayson of Team Gibraltar, they found that was a Phoenician offering from about 800 BCE. And it was found in that same cave under the earth. And that's how they dated Phoenicians haven't been there. And you have this man riding a horse. And what's most unique about this man riding the horse is his head. He has a really, really big head that is outside for the rest of his body. So the Phoenicians had seen this image, okay? And they created an offering of this man riding a horse, with the man with a huge, really head riding a horse. He doesn't have a helmet on. He's got a really big head. It's just, even if you put a helmet on, you can see he's got like this massive, massive head. And so it's quite interesting. So the Phoenicians had seen this and they cleaned it off like I had the cleaned off image, and they made the same interpretation as I did. Pretty cool stuff. So, Jeff, you do realize you're making history on this podcast right now, right?
I don't, but I'm happy to.
Well, now you know. So we can actually look at this man on the horse.
Can we back up for a second? What is the symbology? What's the origin? What is the significance of this really huge headed man? Like, where did the Phoenician see it before?
They didn't see it before. They never saw it before.
Okay, so this is the first.
So this is their first look in the Gorham Cave, that they see this man with the huge head, and then they made an offering so that whenever they visited or sailed by, they'd stop and throw the offering in for good luck or something.
So they thought it was something sacred.
They thought it was something sacred, yeah, something that would give them prosperity, strong winds in the correct direction, that sort of stuff. So the man that's running actually overlaps with the horse. That one could form the impression that the man is riding the horse. But the man is one could take off the head of the horse, and it would look just like a centaur.
There we go.
Because that's how they. So we're going back to this shamanic tradition of the Yakut, that the so-called shaman is transitioning between the horse and the man form. He actually there's many other forms he goes into, but we're not going to do that today. We're not going to go there today. So we have a centaur.
Are they Indo-European? The Yakut?
The Yakut would be Indo-European. No, they would not. Wow. So you're asking that's a big question. So the language group of the Yakut originates from like the Sami people, which would be in Norway, Finland, Norway. Okay, that's where the language forms. So if you could somehow draw an Indo-European going along that line, and the DNA trail also goes up through the Sami and across the northern Siberia, because these were the nomadic people.
So they would have met. They would have been familiar with each other's tales and stories, even if they. And I know Indo-European is a linguistic group, not a biological or genetic group. So at the very least, they met each other at some point.
Exactly. And so you look at the DNA. You can look at the DNA of people from North Africa, Western North Africa, that ties into the DNA of people in the Sami, that goes across to the Siberia, the eastern Siberia. So very interesting. So we have this concept. We have if you take off the head of the horse, it fits very well that the man with the big head becomes a centaur. I mean, it just slips right in very differently. So if someone's riding a horse, they have to be a little further back on the saddle, or without a saddle, whether they're on the saddle or not, they have to be a little further back. Otherwise, is sticking into the horse, and it's not a very comfortable ride. But this is a
when you ride a horse, you don't ride over either of its shoulders or hip bones. Whichever.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what the right term is for a four-legged animal, but you want to be in the middle. The middle is the safe spot.
The prominent man's part is not in the neck of the horse. That would be for certain.
Right.
And so we can overlap we can look separately, the running man who's standing is running. We can see him riding the horse, and we can see him as a centaur. And because these overlap with each other, because it's transforming from one to the other. And that's part of the mythology. And when we look at, there's many images of centaurs, but when you look at the images of typically Greek images of Chiron as a centaur, Chiron has a human's feet, and he has the horse sticking out his backside. Okay, so Chiron is different from other centaurs. Other centaurs, they're horses with, you know, with human upper torso. But Chiron is typically depicted. He's a special centaur. He's a magical centaur. He's sort of, we could say, he's not a shaman, but we can say shamanic type of centaur. He's medicine and all this sort of stuff. And so that's how the ancient Greeks depicted Chiron. In the same way, one could see that's depicted on the Scorum etching in Gibraltar, and one could say is depicted at the Grotte Père as the Agnus Dei panel. And so, Jeff, did I go beyond before our first conversation? Have we taken beyond what you believe a centaur could be, what Sagittarians may not be? Mm-hmm. Did the Greeks discover any of this?
I'm not surprised. I mean, of course, the detail and the actual specifics of it are way beyond what I would know. I'm not surprised about the Sagittarius thing. You know, obviously, it dawned on me previously, and I am fully convinced that the Greeks, I mean, they put their little stamp on it, just like everybody puts their stamp on it. I mean, just like the Bible mirrors, you know, copies parts of the Enuma Elish, and that probably copies part of the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then I'm sure that there's things that never made it to writing that came before those things as well. So, yeah, I mean, things being built upon, concepts being built upon prior concepts, ideas, archetypes, books, temples, cities, forts. I mean, that's what we do. That's what, you know, that's what people do. So you definitely put meat on those bones and arrange it into a skeleton that makes sense. Mine was, you know, probably like that fake skeleton the guy in Knoxville put together, but, you know, mine would have been some chaos, you know, creature as opposed to look like a centaur. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I like the word that you use is archetype. Just when you use the word archetype, it's of course a Greek word, arche, I guess, right? But is we most prominently hear it from Carl Jung. And Carl Jung said that these archetypal characters are effectively metaphors for other things. And when you hypothetically, you could say that there's the hero, there's a villain, there's a damsel in distress, but you could also say that there's the horse, the pregnant mare, is an archetype, and you could say that someone as smart as an owl or strong as a bull, and the Minotaur gives us that concept of the strength of the bull. So when we look at archetypes, we can look at archetype, the concept today, and we can look at it through the ancient Greeks, and we can look at it through the Yakuts, and we can look at the upper pillar, the shaman, and we see the same, or we project the same concepts, because the hero and the villain are always the same. Okay. Yeah. And that the bull is, anybody's walked among bulls, it's unnerving. Okay. This big, strong animal and could be running at you. And I'm not exactly sure of how smart owls are, but I'll give it to people. Or strong as an ox. So we keep these archetypes, what Jung believed was our unconscious, or a collective unconscious. And he really struggled with where or how these actually happened. As early as he could go was the ancient Egyptians, and he traveled to North America, and he traveled to Africa, and he saw these common mythologies, and he saw these common archetypes. And so people from that point said, well, how do we carry this information? Do we carry it in our DNA? Do we carry it in the Akashic record in the clouds? Do everybody download these things? You've heard all the stories. And it's an interesting idea. I don't buy into it. Or the most recent, the last 20 years is ancient aliens. Did ancient aliens have this idea and, sprinkle it around the world for people to have, or the lost Atlanteans who sailed and everywhere and spread the good news. But these stories go deeper in time. And so Jung was in some sense correct that they're part of our psyche. But on the other side, they're just natural, that if you see a bull and it's charging, it's very unnerving.
Right, it's instinctual. I mean, even if Carl Jung was 100% right, I've heard it's pronounced Jung and June. I'm not sure which is correct. Where did the archetype in our DNA come from? I mean, there's still no answer to that. Even if he's correct, it's completely archetypal somewhere in our brain. Why is it somewhere in our brain? So, I mean, that question he hasn't answered, which can still be filled in by Atlanteans, angels, demons, aliens, or some sort of, DNA possible memory that goes back to, pre us splitting from chimpanzees, and some of those were afraid of snakes. So, a big beast comes running at you, whether it's a rhinoceros, a elephant, or a bull, where you're going to run or climb up a tree. I mean, that. And, that makes sense. I mean, butterflies migrate, salmon know where to go, the elephant graveyard, mating patterns, the geography. So, why wouldn't we have some of those embedded DNA memories also? I mean, we all came from the same little like Minnie Mouse kind of thing.
Absolutely. And we also have cave art now to 34,000 years ago with these archetypal characters, the images.
Yeah, and that was the show. So, folks, if you haven't heard the first show and you're only hearing this one, if you go back, it might even be the better order to go on. But I don't think so. I think they both stand on their own.
Yeah, and these images, they don't originate in the cave art. They originate in the world of the people around them.
Sure, of course.
And so these things go back very, very. So when I would say the time that we became human versus the time that we're not chimpanzees or some others, the common ancestor like chimpanzee, is that when we started to tell similar stories based on images and ideas that we found. And so we could show this at, cave art to 36,000 years ago. But my bet is that these do go back for hundreds of thousands of years ago, but we don't have an archaeological record because people weren't, when people were living next to the source, they didn't recreate it. But when they moved away from the source, they created the churches that represent their past.
Or if they did recreate it, it would not be in any way that was permanent. It might have been in the sand near them, or in the dirt or whatever. But that on the inside of the bark of a tree. But those things don't last more than a few weeks, months tops. Then they fade away because of rain and erosion and ashes to ashes, dust to dust kind of stuff.
Absolutely. So on the show, Jeff, today we have scratched away or even dug deeper into the history of humanity through the centaur.
Yeah, and I'm still going with Sagittarius as a centaur, but I'm okay with the fact that Sagittarius can be both the horse, the centaur, and the man separately, just because I think there's some symbology in that, in our sort of mastery of the world around us, in that standing alone kind of thing, but needing a little bit of help still with man on top.
And you're okay that perhaps 8% of your audience, Sagittarians, may have said, "I'm never going to listen to this show again because this guy has just thrown me under the bus and rolled over a few times."
I don't think that no, I'm not worried about that. I also think if we look at any astrological sign or zodiac sign, that we're going to find the villains and the heroes of history. Maybe not as prominent as that, but if one dives deep enough and keeps the list short, you can probably find names that are just as wretched and just as generous. Also, right now, as we're recording this on March 9th of 2025. Taylor Swift is fairly polarizing in certain circles. So, especially
she lost the Super Bowl. She.
But didn't she win the one before? I mean, listen. I maybe know the names of 3 Taylor Swift songs. I would maybe recognize 2 if I heard them. Of course, I know who she is when I see her. But that's probably last 5-6 years. Maybe before that, I might have guessed. Is that Taylor Swift? I don't. So not really a big deal in my life. But hey, we can turn anything into a controversy or a conspiracy, and and I know some Swifties, so don't mess with them. They will fight for their girl. I know that much.
Perhaps a song that you can use to end this show is your wife's favorite Taylor Swift song.
Oh, my wife is from Ecuador. She is 100% Latina. I don't think that she cares a horse's lick about Taylor Swift, but you know what? I will ask her. Usually I ask the guests what the guests, request for the outro is, but I will ask her. I'm a little bit afraid that Taylor Swift might be powerful enough that she'd actually find my copyright infringement, even though it's de minimis and it's the outro, not the intro. But if my wife doesn't have one, do you have a song that you would like?
Well, the last one we did was, I think it was Picasso's Last Words, correct?
Oh, I don't know. Sure, sounds right.
Yeah, and you said so. That was the last one. Is there anything? So we have a lot of astrology going here. Aquarius.
Used Aquarius before, but that's okay. We can use them again. I
used Aquarius before.
I've used Horse with No Name before on a show that had no connection to Horse with No Name for me, but again, guest privilege.
So you've used the Horse with No Name before?
Yeah, but I don't think we've ever used Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones, but I'm sure there's lots of songs
that would be good. Wild Horses by the Rolling Stones. That would be awesome.
Well, that's the one we're going to use. So, folks, that's what you're going to hear, but you're not going to hear it just yet. You're going to hear it after Bernie tells you all the places that you can find, follow him, and support his stuff. So where can people find and follow you?
So people can find and follow me at beforeorion.com. I'm on X, I'm on Facebook, I'm on the new one, Blue Sky.
Blue Sky, sure.
And YouTube. So most of the material that we discussed today is available in different forms on my beforeorion.com YouTube channel.
Okay.
And so people find different narratives and also maybe they can prepare for the next show that we do.
Excellent.
Whatever that might be.
That's right. Well, you'll tell me when you've come up with something, or I'll ask you when I figured out something that might be right for you. Probably the former first. All right. Very good. Wild Horses, I think is what we said. So that's what you're going to hear next. Thanks very much for tuning in, folks. If you're here by accident or you're here because you're a fan of Bernie's, thank you. Welcome. The show was formerly known as Garden of Doom. It's now Garden of Thought, and it is on every platform as Garden of Thought. So you can subscribe, Apple, Spreaker, Spotify, Podbean, Amazon, whatever, wherever you're even Audible. Though apparently Audible is part of Amazon or Apple, or they're all in some allegiance. So it's not as special as I thought it was originally. And you get 3 shows. This one, there's generally a midweek show, which thematically is probably going to not be as different. So I like to think of the weekend show as sort of like if you tune in the History Channel sort of at 7 or 8 p.m. and maybe you leave the channel on till 3 or 4 a.m., that kind of a contrast from very documentarianism to, ancient aliens and other fun stuff. The midweek show is more like a magazine show, sort of like if people remember 48 Hours or 2020, sort of like that. And then the third show is GOT presents the Book of Black, or Gospel of Thomas. That's with my co-host PJ Black and/or Mr. Thomas. The Lufisto's joining us on one, and that's where, and they are both, they're all pro wrestlers with plenty of bona fides under that, and we talk to people in wrestling about generally non-wrestling things. We use wrestling as an icebreaker and a crutch, but generally we're trying to talk about non-wrestling things, and so that's a lot of fun as well. And if you want to find me other places, you can find me on Wrestling Soup. I do body slam briefs for them, where the intersection of law and wrestling meet. And I often can be found on the SmackDown review show for Wrestling Soup, and I do some other stuff too. But that's it. Bernie, anything else you want to add for the good folks to hear, see, find, or are we good?
Well, only that this is a great podcast. I hope people subscribe. I have, and I listen to lots of the programs, and I wish everybody the best.
Excellent. All right. Thanks very much, folks. Thanks for tuning in.
Bought them for you.